Here's the big question this show answers. How do we leverage technology and human science to positively impact our personal and professional life? The Tech Human Experience has the answer. Here's your host, Inc. 5000 tech founder, neuroscience junkie, and Navy SEAL wannabe, Javier Guerra.
Hello, my fellow tech humans. Today's guest has played a key role in evolving enterprise architecture and application development at Security Service Federal Credit Union. Starting as a technical architect, he has grown into a leader who effectively coordinates technology teams by combining empathy with strategic thinking. His work has significantly contributed to enhancing operations within the financial services industry. In this episode, we'll be exploring his perspectives on technology, leadership, and driving change in complex environments. Please welcome Julian Hall. Thank you for joining us today, Julian.
Pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me, Javier.
Yeah, always good talking with you. And, I'm sure that the listeners would agree the accent doesn't hurt the situation. So we're going to start off today with a stat and kind of talk about that. And it has to do with data growth explosion, or the data growth explosion. Did you know that over 90% of the world's data has been created in the last 2 years? Were you aware of that?
I wasn't aware of the specific numbers. It doesn't surprise me, though, because of the massive increase in the amount of unstructured data that has now become mainstream. Images, videos, mixed media, other virtual reality files, but also the sharing of data, the multiplication of the different parties that have different interests in different amounts of data, and the importance of keeping the data, processing the data, deriving the data, increasing other values from that data. It is a world that is compounding on itself. So it doesn't surprise me that that kind of growth is out there.
Yeah, it's definitely becoming more important as AI starts to develop, and just, being able to take all that data, organize it effectively in alignment with like data governance practices, and then to, having it structured in a way that systems like AI can intelligently read the information, absorb the information, whatever you want to call it, then to be able to use it to make business decisions and do other things. It's huge right now. And I think I know a lot of organizations are really scrambling to try to get a grip on that so that they can take advantage of all these advancements that we're really seeing unfold. And it's just moving so fast. It's crazy. So how do you see this, this data explosion really affecting the way organizations manage and leverage their technological assets?
Well, I think that organizations have got to realize the challenge of the complexity that is growing upon them. And I think that's a key part of understanding what data has different perspectives, different meanings to the different parties that are involved with the running of their organization. I think that the old kind of mentality of it's my data, it's my business, has got to be expanded to be able to understand what are the other kinds of parties that have to be sent that data, that have a right to inspect that data, users and their privacy concerns on that data. I think there's a lot of things that organizations need to do to then recognize, okay, in order for me to run my business, there's going to be aspects of the data that I won't control. Those are going to be services, those are going to be composite pieces of data that I may contribute to, that I get responses back. And I have to then understand, how is this data blended? How is this data used? Who is my different stakeholders that need this data? How is it then potentially also reincorporated back into my organization? And who knows exactly what it really means, what it's being used for, and the accuracy and reliability behind all of that data. There are a lot of these different aspects that go well beyond big data that had been a good evolution of trying to understand how do you put good containing organization around it. But now we're moving more into the world of there are many different big data groups together, and there are different levels of reliance that organizations have for different kinds of needs. And to be able to put that all together, to understand the flow of the data, the intersection points of who's owning the data, managing the data, changing the data, and potentially are users of that data. Those are, I think, a whole upgrade in the level of involvement and understanding that organizations need to have to be able to kind of cope with that multiplier dimension of now how data lives within the whole world, basically.
Yeah, my brain actually is starting to hurt just thinking about the complexities of that. So there's so many different facets of it, and I would imagine that per industry, per individual organization, it's going to be different. It depends on how they do business, where the data goes, who's looking at the data, what regulations they're under, where they're located, like you name it. It's got to be it's like emptying the ocean with a teaspoon, so to speak. Not to even mention like the changes that are coming with regulation and everything. And I've always, for some reason, it's coming to mind is that a lot of times there's certain regulations and stuff that come out in Europe that then the U.S. starts to kind of adopt, right? But we're more of the laggards in a lot of cases. But I don't know, maybe that's a good thing, right? Because we can kind of see how it's how and why things are being done, maybe in another country, and then kind of maybe use some of those lessons learned to maybe have a better experience or better implementation or better changes or make better changes throughout the organization in the US. Have you what are your viewpoints on that?
Well, I think one of the obvious ones that's out there in that whole space is the movement that Europe's had towards the GDPR regulations that have been put in place. Privacy of data and being able to put more control back into the consumer and the data about that consumer and how organizations are allowed to share that information. I think that has been an area that is inevitable, that there's going to be some degree of attention that's going to happen in the United States along those lines. There are organizations that are already preempting that kind of direction as well to put better kinds of organizational controls and expose those to the end users to allow people to have a better understanding about what data is shared. There is a certain amount of that already with regard to how you can sign into different sites and you can see what kinds of third-party agreements are in place and to what degree the sharing can happen of information. But I think that there is going to be potentially more that comes as an echo of what's happening in Europe in that regard. But I think that that data as a whole, it goes beyond just privacy. There's ways that contact information should be more standardized. There's ways in which security information, personal information, should be better standardized with regard to how it's administered, how it is secured. Those kinds of things go hand in hand with access to data, privacy, and security of data. But I think also that there are ways in which different kinds of media, different kinds of standard elements of a product, of a transaction, of a person, that those kinds of things, I think there is a need that will emerge for those kinds of key data elements that make up the fabric of how organizations live and breathe, that those, I think, will emerge as standards that make it much more easy to integrate to different systems and to have other organizations be able to absorb and process those elements of that data, because there is more of a common understanding about how they're structured, what they mean, what they contain, and other aspects of what is contained within that data that can be self-explanatory. It's almost like XML a long time ago was a great way to standardize the notation of different kinds of data. But there needs to be like another few levels beyond that to provide that kind of self-describing data elements or data schemas that can accompany different kinds of data that then provides more of a universal way for that data to be consumed, processed, and shared amongst different third parties, and also enable that kind of data to be controlled by consumers as well, because there's a common way in which that data is being handled across the different kinds of organizations that are potentially handling it.
Yeah, it's so deep. There's such a we can go down like a massive rabbit hole. Uh, so, but before we do that and kind of burn all the time, I would say let's jump into today's topic. Today's topic, exploring the core of data integrity and system integration. In this episode, we'll delve into the critical role of data in shaping business strategies and the complexities of navigating tech challenges in organizational settings. We'll also explore the intricate art of system integration, sharing insights on ensuring efficiency and resilience in tech infrastructures. So, systems integration, it's we can go very deep and wide here. But, as far as approaches to integration, can you share your strategy for integrating different technology systems within an organization? Like, how do you really ensure these systems work together seamlessly?
It is a challenge. I've had the privilege of being able to tackle that kind of question, many different kinds of settings. And one key theme is a fundamental starting block of approaching to integration. And it comes down to what are the data elements that you are working with? What are the data key constructs that you are basically working with between two sides? The two systems that may be integrating with each other, if we just talk one-to-one, they are only doing that because they've got a reason to update something, change something, find something, look at something. And that something is the actual starting point of it all. What I've found is that the most success comes from having that initial question about what is it that is going to need to happen? What is going to be operated on? Basically, the nouns of the sentence. You kind of think about then the next step is about the verbs that operate on those nouns. They will either update, add, all of the CRUD kinds of updates that go on. Then you think about the other side of the sentence, the subject that is interacting with the verb that is working on the noun, and the subject being more about the users. So you think about these things in a very, very simplistic term to begin with. You have users, you have operations, and you have data. And it starts with the data. You organize what it is that is going to be operated on, and you cluster the services around those data elements that have in common. So contact information would be something that has its own realm, and it would have its own set of operations that work on that data. It doesn't always work out well if you have services that blend operations on contact data, say, with a product catalog. Even though it might be that your end users may like to have one service they call that's going to say update a phone number at the same time as they update their product catalog for whatever kinds of reasons. From an organizational standpoint, the ability to service and support those kinds of integrations is much better served by having individual services that are categorized to operate on one realm of data. And as those things need to be worked on, so the users, the clients, those programs, those entities should make multiple calls. One of the things that's also been very successful, and I'm talking about real-time integration, when we talk about batch integration, where you have an offline kind of process that maybe is doing bulk data moves and uploads and imports of data, that's a different kind of use case. The modern world, the real-time integration, that is a very important and perhaps the most emphasized way when we talk about integration of making things happen. That one of the key things about that kind of integration is making sure that you understand what that data is going to be doing, but you also are looking at, okay, what is going to be the needs around the services that are going on with regard to security, with regard to the speed that they need to operate on, the level of data that's involved. And you look at making sure that you're designing the services with supportability, with scalability, with security. And one of the things that I've always found on this, it's a bit of a techie term, but the services for updating, you make them stateless. Because if you make a service that does not require the end user to keep tabs on where they are within their scrolling of a file or the updates that they've made to different things, you make things stateless. It makes things a lot simpler to implement. Now, the other thing around integration that has been key on this, in what I've found, is to not go too crazy on every single kind of protocol access method to be able to invoke these different services. So it may be you pick some simple things like RESTful services, JSON-based services. There may be some other legacy things you may need to do, like maybe it's MQ, some kind of messaging service. But along those rails that you choose, one thing is also key, and that is to have a standardized format for all of your different requests. No matter what realm of data that they're dealing with, you need to have a way that each of these services, no matter what they're doing, is wrapped up with a header or a other kind of format that makes these services very much alike with regard to how they are going to be processed within your organization. If you do that, you are able to have other kinds of derived benefits. So for instance, within that header, you can put in your own version levels so that the treatment of different clients can be handled if there's different versions of a service that they need, and you can roll out things in a more gradual way by doing that. Also, if you have standard headers that contain standard pieces of information about who's making the call, what they're doing with it, you can derive other kinds of benefits. For instance, I've seen dashboards come from it. So no matter what kind of service is going on, if that is updating an account, if that is adding a new product, if that is doing a read for a self-service customer, if all of those services are processed with a standardized header, it means that if you've got a centralized hub that is distributing that information, that hub can also tee off that information, streaming it into another service that is consolidating all of those pieces of information together to create dashboards and insights in real time that provides all kinds of abilities to understand what's going on within your organization, with reporting, with problem diagnosis, other kinds of benefits that you can have, and potentially even be able to blend activity that might be going on with a self-service channel, that might be going on with an employee-facing channel, that might be going on with another kind of back-office system, to have those centrally managed with that same common way in which those services are brought together. That makes it very easy then to be able to derive even more kinds of insights as to what's going on by correlating those different service invocations together that you would never otherwise be able to do. That kind of approach of standardizing the interfaces and the services that you make, that by far has proven to be an absolutely game-changing way to approach the integration that in where I've seen it implemented, has provided a significant competitive advantage. As other kinds of services need to be done, other vendors brought on board, there's already a standard, a way that is understood through the whole organization because it's made common as a way to integrate no matter what kind of business, no matter what kind of back end, no matter what kind of legacy system. It is all organized and made exposed in the same way for everybody for all of those different kinds of service and the data and the back ends that are behind it. Oh, there's a lot there, I
So would
realize.
you so would you say that that's, this is kind of what I'm picking up from this, is that like this is one of the biggest things that you've learned over your career that has kind of helped you to proactively put this, you're putting this strategy into place to proactively mitigate the risk of challenges in the future and saving you and your team and your organization so much time and energy from having to go clean things up later, basically.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And, one of the side benefits that I've seen emerge on this is that an organization that has then got to that point of standardizing the way in which integration happens for these different parties, different services, backends, it becomes self-perpetuating. People understand that this is the language of how you talk about integrating. This is the way it happens. This is the way that we plug things together. This is what I expect. This is how I build it. This is how I test it. This is how I move it into production. This is potentially how I can see how it works with other kinds of services together. This is the way that I can talk to my vendors in exactly the same way. This is how I can talk to my colleagues about what's going on. It becomes then not just a universal language of integration, it's also a universal language of a organization, even beyond information technology departments. People, I've heard them talk about integration terminology where I've even kind of taken aback and thinking, wow, you're really getting that kind of perspective on how we talk about integration. You are seeing how that standardization provides the way that you can have effective, quick communications, accurate communications between the businesses that are using it that are not technical, and above all, our third-party vendors. And I've seen it proven out time and time again how third parties, when they see that kind of level of organization, it makes everything go much more smoothly, quickly, and with higher quality because the vendors understand it. There's less to understand because it is all standardized. And you have organizations that know the ropes about what goes on to connect things, to wire things up in non-production environments, to test things, the test data that's involved on those standard services, which can be then dummied up as well. It provides so many kinds of benefits that are transformative with regard to the productivity and efficiency of organizations, not only to implement new technology, but to make updates and to facilitate the communication that goes on within the whole organization around other things that might be considered for expansion of any particular services that an organization might be taking on.
Yeah, yeah. And these systems are housing and processing so much data, you know, in relation to really maintaining that data integrity. In your experience, what practices do you think are essential for maintaining that integrity of the data? And then, especially when you're dealing with large volumes of sensitive financial information.
There is no substitute for the in-depth knowledge of the data. And that poses a problem about to what degree of in-depth data knowledge do you need? And I think that brings up the question of knowing your data schema and the level of importance to associate with different parts of it. Because if there are certain things that are on the peripheral, it may be that there is a particular kind of transaction that doesn't happen very often. It's very obscure. It's maybe related to what goes on specifically, say, for instance, in a leap year, that may be just very idiosyncratic. That level of understanding what's going on there wouldn't necessarily then compare to someone's understanding of, say, how a new product gets added to the catalog for a particular user and a particular attribute of that particular product that they are doing. And there may be then understandings of, okay, these are the different reporting elements, these are the different characteristics that go with it. That's where you need to then, from that, as an organization, appreciate where you need to have more in-depth expertise on those different aspects of that data, because you need then to be able to have a quality workforce with quality supporting documentation and utilities and tools that provides the ability then to manage that data and to be able to know what degree of hygiene to apply to that data, which means they're not just on the actual sanitation of the data for accuracy and structural or formatting integrity that goes on, but also with regard to the level of, I would say, integrity over time that should also be enforced on different kinds of data, because you then need to know, okay, these are the different kinds of data sets, these data records that we need to make sure that we are running proper utilities. We know what they should be. We know what that data needs to have with regard to tolerance. And you need to know then potentially how are you going to rectify that data. All of that prioritization, it comes down from having an organization that appreciates the most important levels of data, the things that are most important from not just the organization standpoint, from business, but also potentially from regulatory, from other kinds of third parties that have a vested interest in that data. So that it is unfortunately, it's not something that is today a one-stop thing that you've got a utility that will take care of all of your data management and data integrity needs. The human element of being able to manage that data and to be able to provide the appropriate guidance and stewardship of that data. I'll give you a great example here. An organization I've worked with, and actually doesn't, there's many different organizations, there was this notion of a balance. And people were thinking, well, okay, well, I'm in the business. I want to know what's the balance of your account. Well, in different core banking systems, there are many different types of balance that go with accounts. There is an opening balance, there's a ledger balance, there's a current balance, there's a closing balance. There's about 7 or 8 different kinds of balance. And you go back to the business and you say, okay, you want the balance, which balance do you want? They say, well, what do you mean? What balance? Do you then have to go through different kinds of explanations each time? It kind of depends. And that kind of question, that kind of terminology, those kinds of things, that distinguishes then the effectiveness of organizations with regard to how well they manage those communications, how well they understand the data. Because if you don't have people who are appropriately understanding the potential traps that come with that, then it may be that someone who asks for the balance data, they go to someone in IT and says, okay, here's the balance. They give them the wrong balance. Then they're going ahead and making marketing decisions, or they're making other kinds of business decisions, planning decisions, performance decisions based on that wrong balance. Then, just through a simple communication issue, not appreciating the context of the question and really potentially seeing what the real underlying need is, that potentially is one of those things that we're still a way away from that level of mastery of handling of that data between all the parties that are involved. And the elements, I pick on one, but you can multiply that by tens of thousands.
It's so complex and changing, right? Every day, or not every day, maybe every day. From a strategic data management perspective, and even from a business decision-making perspective, what do you think are the most significant challenges like in today in really managing those, not only managing, but safeguarding organizational data assets?
There's got to be an approach that involves the complexity management of an organization and its data, and having an organization that really appreciates the complexity of the data that's involved, the magnitude of it, the different diverse ranges of the data, the history of the data, the different kinds of way in the way which the data is stored, the different basically similar kinds of data that are not quite the same. The appreciation of that then is the starting point. But the next step is really then, what are the ways in which you are breaking up the handling of those different data realms? You're going to need to have different disciplines that have different aspects of their stewardship over that data. Someone who is looking at a marketing centric focus of the data is going to have a different kind of ownership and care over the kinds of things that they're looking at, compared to someone who is looking at, say, for instance, the balancing integrity of what might be going on with financial transactions that are moving. The emphasis then comes down to identifying then the different realms. Then comes the next level of building your organization that has the people who appreciate the stewardship responsibilities that go with each of those realms. Then, as well as of having that appreciation of those kinds of ways that that data is used and is dependent for an organization, then comes the next step also in transcending your own realm of data and your own perspectives of what's happening within that, then to appreciate other realms. And how can you advocate for the appropriate handling and use of your data, as opposed to what other people are doing with that data, which then brings in a different kind of dialogue, a different kind of way in which organizations should think about the different people that are involved, the different communication vehicles that can be used to handle that, and what kind of check-ins should be going on, what kinds of abilities within the management should be going on, the leadership, to be able to know, yes, the data is appropriately being handled and understood by the different areas. And how do I know that the different areas that are handling different data have a good and accurate understanding of what is going on with that data? Will they know when it's correct? Will they know when it's changed, that it's had a different meaning? And that comes down to having those relationships with other realms, because the people who are potentially closer to the data, typically sometimes in IT, often in vendor realms as well, how are you subscribing as a client to those people who have that closeness to the data, to make sure that if they have a change in perspective of how that data is used, or a different kind of type of what's going on with a different kind of data, how is that communication happening to make sure that any changes at the source of that data are appropriately understood and communicated to those people who subscribe to some kind of dependency to that data? Having that kind of dependency linkage and awareness, that is something that organizations, I've always struggled to make sure that they have it. They tend to think about things in a way that builds an initial connection, but don't necessarily always appreciate it isn't about a one-stop or a one-off action. That kind of appreciation of data, that is an ongoing process, because the data and the uses of that data and the increase of different things that go on with that data, that is a constant. And the business is a changing entity as well. That's always constant. And so if you don't have that kind of mentality of a continuous and maturing approach to how you are managing that data from the teams and the utilities and the vendors and the whole end-to-end life cycle and context that that data lives in, then you're going to potentially get tripped up with something that will come out later on, where either it's operational or it's security, or it is just a roadblock in time, because people have to figure out, oh, well, this doesn't work anymore. We have to repair this data, or we have to implement a new process to clean something up, or whatever might be the side effect of whatever it is you discover as a result.
Yeah, that it's so complex. It's just a moving target, and that is very difficult, right? What you're describing, the different departments, the different realms, the different use cases, the different everything in relation to the organization, what the organization is doing and what the use case is of that data. But then now we're talking about AI coming into the picture, right? And so we're talking, you know, we're alluding to, or you're alluding to, really the transparency and accountability and use and kind of alignment of those people with the data, with the organization, with the need. But now we're talking about bringing an AI into the picture. In your opinion, how can we establish standards of accountability for AI systems that really ensure and justify decisions in a more meaningful way, so to speak?
Yeah, that is an important question. One I don't think it's enough airing out there. I liken, I've seen different phases of technology that have happened over the decades, and they start off with some very good kinds of benefits that are obvious. As you start to use the technology, there are then some consequences that need to be looked at. And I think that the level of accountability of AI solutions needs to be appropriately sized according to the importance of what that AI technology is going to be responsible for. So, for instance, I'll give you an example, I'll give you kind of different ranges here. Yeah, most recently, AI was used to research a mathematical problem, and it was to do with matrix multiplication. Now, I won't get into what that is, but basically what it did is it provided a way to multiply these two things called matrices that had been something in mathematics that had been done for centuries. But the AI found a mechanism to multiply these matrices together that was far more efficient than what had ever been done before. Well, how do we know? Well, we know because it was obvious when the solution came about. It was there in front of your eyes about how quick it was doing. It was self-defining as an answer. It was self-supporting as an answer. Then you can kind of look at another set of how AI has been involved. Now, I know that in cancer research, AI has been involved looking at images and has been identifying suspicious masses and pointing out possibilities of cancer. Now, it's not saying that they were diagnosing people with cancer. That's a very key point here. AI, in that perspective, was merely used as an additional kind of advisor to the human that was reviewing these cancer images that were coming up, or these sample images that were coming up. That level of accountability then was on the human to look and to verify and potentially to discard or to move on. Now, then you look at the other kinds of AI that are evolving. And you look at, say, for instance, in the realm of, say, the finance world, there may be real-time decisions that need to be made in making a transaction in the stock market. Well, you need to then have a really good understanding then if a trade is going to get submitted in real time without anyone reviewing that particular trade, then you have to have a good understanding about why that trade is made, or you need to have good losses in place that basically understand the probability and you are willing to work with that, or you have a review system that's in place. But I think that what we're looking at here is the next step here with artificial intelligence, where more and more the autonomy of artificial intelligence is being brought to the forefront, so that it's not just, say, for instance, in submitting a trade, which has its own kind of potential downsides to it. When you're starting to talk about potentially giving these systems, self-driving cars, as an example here, then you need to have a good understanding in advance of when you're deploying that autonomous vehicle, that the AI system has all of the different environments, all of the different scenarios in place that will then know and justify that, yes, it can cope with all of the different surroundings that are out there. That kind of ability, I think, is going to necessitate an evolution to how folks are going to uh, build the world that AI systems must exist within, because it's going to be down to us as the builders of this technology, the expansion of the AI technology, to think about, okay, how do we get AI systems to explain what it is that they have come up with? How did they come up with it? Why are they recommending this? What other kinds of alternatives? What pros and cons they were able to present that came up with a particular recommendation. No longer is it satisfactory to look at, say, large language models as a black box of like many thousands of layers of these nodes that are processing and that emerge with so-called learning. It's going to need to go into a different level where there's going to need to be ways that the systems will need to be able to provide the justifications, the explanations that provide proof. And you may need AI to help AI systems that can then start to interrogate and to be able to derive and be able to potentially explain the emerged kinds of answers in terms of, yes, this is why this emergence has happened. This is what is the consequence on it. And I'll tell you another angle on the way in which this world of managing AI systems must happen is also an appreciation of the sensitivity of some data that is being used. There's been, I know that there's examples that have happened out there where there's been information that has been wrong, chatbots that have come up with totally inappropriate kinds of dialogues. There's been plagiarisms that have been allegated in certain circumstances as well. There needs to be a way in which AI systems evolve that incorporates a sensitivity to the data that they are handling, so that it is understood in different categories and topics that are involved. There may be additional kinds of controls, additional sensitivities, and additional kinds of hesitations that would need to come from these AI systems that also provides a consistent way that fits in with our own human way of being able to look at doubt, look at the value of these different answers and the different perspectives that come from different parties with these different kinds of subjects. So I think there's a long way we have to go as far as like recognizing, yes, it's great that AI systems can do certain things, but if we want them to then be fully integrated in so much more, then we have to take responsibility of providing the appropriate guardrails that these things must exist and to provide accountability for. If they're going to provide that kind of peer level kind of direction, they need to provide the peer level substantiation that should back it up.
I'm envisioning a solution here on what you're talking about. And it's like, yes, maybe you're leveraging large language models, right, to give you an answer, but then you have another system that's checking or interrogating, like you said, of, okay, how did you come up with this, right? What sources did you use? What information did you use? And then there's like another system that's like fact checking, where its sources and where it got its information from, right? And then maybe there's a human involved in that at some point that then is kind of also doing some fact checking of one of those systems that's kind of fact checking the other systems. But it's, I don't see any other way than it being some sort of a multi-layered approach, because it's, you don't necessarily know the integrity of what these systems are pushing out there. They could just be kind of making it up based off of information that's not accurate wherever it's gathering it from. So it's it's definitely a deep area that's going to, continuously be focused on working to solve, for sure. So, it's so complex of an area that we're talking about, from a leadership perspective, helping guide teams, organizations into the future. in your opinion, how do you really achieve the balance between rapid implementation of innovation and adhering to regulatory compliance, so to speak?
Yeah, it's a long-standing balancing question that, with regard to how do you balance that kind of innovation, the whole cliche about, hey, we're having to race while having to change the tires on the car at the same time. Yeah, absolutely. It's been that kind of question for some time, but I think it's also been accelerating for some time, meaning that the challenges are getting ever more demanding. One of the things that you start off with is that understanding of the business goals. There's got to be a common understanding of the framework of what the business is trying to achieve. What are the main kinds of important areas that are going on? It starts with that. There are other kinds of um, side considerations that then also are very important that come into play that don't necessarily get immediate attention, but when mentioned, obviously are backed up with regard to things, for example, like security, access of data, compliance and regulatory things. Those kinds of things, those are non-negotiables to keep the lights on within an organization. Then you look at the supportability of different systems that are there with regard to the legacy systems that are out there, the technological debt that's out there. And you look at those different things, and people have got different kinds of perspectives. You've got to find a way within your organization to make those voices equally or appropriately heard, that those balances can happen with regard to the resources that need to be deployed, which are scarce. And you've then got to figure out what is the roadmap, what is the timeline of how these things fit in. Certain things with regard to supportability, maybe they can be deferred for a certain period of time, but then people must understand that that deferment then increases its urgency as the time approaches for, say, an end of life. Organizations, though, I think have to then make that kind of balance between those different kinds of needs. And then they have to figure out, okay, where are the resources? Where are the opportunities potentially to kill multiple birds with one stone? And have that kind of dialogue that says, you know what, we've got a business need that needs to change in which we are selling products. And by the way, the system that we're using, hey, we can then get rid of this legacy backend system. Oh, and by the way, there's a way to address this compliance issue that's been nagging over us. There's another kind of security improvement that would come. Those kinds of conversations are ways that you have to be able to approach and know when you're going to get those efficiencies of the initiatives that you're deploying. And then also comes the consideration about the different kinds of dependencies, the interconnectedness of systems. None of the systems that I know of today are in isolation. Typically, there are many different tentacles that they have with regard to third parties or internal systems or other kinds of systems that play a role in their operation. And those also you have to look at as potentially, okay, when do they get updated or how do those get moved at the same time to basically, if there's a project working on those that has a dependency over here, is the way to do things at the same time? Should we do them at the same time? Does testing get improved? Is there a rollout implementation consideration with that? The planning questions are most important, but you also have to have the people and the knowledge to know what the right questions are and to know when you are potentially going to have collisions and what potential options you might have and know those in advance so that you can appropriately, I call it the Tetris game, where you're trying to basically get as much in as you can, tessellating the plane to make as much use and flatten that kind of plane of how you're trying to get everything done to push as much through as you can in an optimal way.
So I'm hearing so much, importance around the strategic planning and moving things forward because so many organizations now are just having to continuously innovate, right? Not only to keep their clients happy because the end client is the end customer is expecting more and more as everything continues to evolve. But just from operational efficiency to remain profitable, all kinds of different things to think about. Could you give any more color or light, shed any more light to, in this type of environment, a business environment, like what are maybe some strategic planning techniques, tools, anything like that to help, implement, to help get a grip on this, as leaders moving forward?
Are you talking more from the leadership perspective, or from an organizational perspective, or what would you?
Well, I think either or, right? It's more of just as, as the business demands, client demands, there's demand for continuous technological advancement into the future, right? That demand is there, and it's probably continuously going to be growing, right? Like how do we get a grip on that, but also move forward with like operational stability and like how can we look at this strategically as we're planning? Is there any techniques or tools, whether it be for leadership, for teams, for technologies, whatever, but is there any kind of strategic planning techniques or tools that you've maybe used that could help the audience?
Yeah, so something I'm going to offer up here. It's incredibly simple, but I've seen it to be incredibly effective. When you are trying to plan for these different changes, these complex updates, the way in which you are trying to communicate what has to happen on different things, then one of the most effective ways of making that kind of communication has been through diagrams. And one of the things that I've seen to be a really effective tool has been the way in which you use something as simple as like Visio to create diagrams that basically show the different key moving parts of a system. I can't remember the time where I've read a 300-page manual. I don't know that I would even, insult anyone by giving them a 400-page design document for them to read through. When you're trying to deal with many different kinds of initiatives, many different complex kinds of scenarios and many different kinds of connections and the data that's involved, then taking the time to have a set of quality diagrams, it may only be one largish one or two, maybe it's a set of diagrams that provide that. It is what I've found to be one of the most effective ways of being able to have the right conversations with all of the different parties. Because everyone's focused then on the diagram. One page, it's one thing to look at. It's not, and it should not be done in an overwhelming way. I got recommendations on how diagrams are most effectively organized to help with systems and the transparency of how those things are put together, so that basically what you want people to do is understand quickly how these things work, how they are put together. Going back to the users, the services, and the data, the subject, the nouns, the verbs, that's the way to kind of organize that information, do it in a way that is standard and repeated in how you are engaging with the different kinds of business. That standardization of communication is a good way then to provide a framework of being able to talk about complex kinds of issues, how things are related, and try and break it down into different abstracted components where you don't overwhelm people with information. Instead, you're bringing them to a level of understanding that helps them to be able to contribute, to voice their interests, to say what's important, to say what they can live without, and to also have a good understanding when you walk away. I've understood what's going to happen. I understand the concerns. I understand why it's going to be potentially difficult to do. I understand why there is this other vendor it's involved. I understand this is going to need a conversation with other parts of the business because I had no idea, thanks to this diagram, that I now know there are going to be these things that are going to be potentially impacted by what we're doing. That kind of approach I've found has always been very effective. There's lots of different ways to team that to attack this kind of question with regard to leadership and communication and complexity. That's just kind of one example, Javier.
Yeah, no, I love it, and it makes me think about, I don't even know what to call it, but it's the whole saying of a picture speaks 1,000 words, right? And so I'm huge on visuals. I'm a very visual learner. A lot of people are very visual learners, and from a neuroscience perspective, there's an argument out there that the brain learns 60,000 times faster with visuals. And so if you can, the ability to look at a diagram, like you're saying, and absorb that is much easier and much quicker for somebody than to, like you said, take a 300-400 page manual and try to read that, right? It doesn't, the brain doesn't work that way. It really works very well typically with, stereotypically with a visual diagram. And it's really tapping more into the subconscious mind, which is where a deeper level of our intelligence is stored, right? Is the subconscious. So I love that. I completely 100% agree with the power of visuals, for sure. So Julian, we are coming up on time here. I'm going to ask you a few more questions before we end for today. In your opinion, what technology does the world need that doesn't exist yet?
I think with when we've been talking about artificial intelligence, I think that I've spoken already around this notion of the different levels of controls, the different levels of accountability and transparency, things about value appreciation that should come from artificial intelligence, sensitivity. I think those next evolutions, if we are serious about incorporating AI into more and more important kinds of responsibilities, that level of maturity in that space is a technology we have not got. And it does need to be invested within, maybe standardized, and potentially even regulated for certain kinds of situations where there is an appropriate need to do so. Yeah, I'd say that's probably the key thing that I would say. That's probably the one area I would bring up. Lots of different things like you can imagine that are out there, but that's probably one I'll just pick on.
Yeah, it's going to be very interesting to see how the next few years unfold, because even right now, there's so many new tools that are just being created and pushed out, but a lot of things are going to change. There's a lot of professionals out there that are a little worried about, their current roles. And there's another saying going on out there that it's, you don't need to worry about AI taking your job. You need to worry about people that know how to leverage AI, that those people are going to potentially take your job. And so, if you look back in history too, right, it's what the cotton, like all the technologies in history that people were worried about their jobs being taken, and they actually created more opportunity. And it's really the people that are looking for that opportunity and looking how, to solve problems by leveraging the advancements in technologies that are being created and pushed out. They're going to be positioned in a very, very good place as the future unfolds, for sure. So exciting times, a little, can be a little scary, but let's focus on the positive and, make the best of it. So Julian, appreciate your time. Really thank you for joining us today and sharing your insights. You've obviously had a long, successful technology career and developed some very deep expertise. Can you help the audience understand how you can really help leaders and organizations leverage your experience?
Well, yeah, but by all means, I'm available. I know there's my contact information is out there on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to engage and informally or however with anyone that might want to just talk about how they are set up within their organization, how they're approaching the complexities that we've been touching on, interdepartmental, between vendors, between other interested parties and stakeholders, I'm available if there are any things that I can do to help.
So you've recently retired, from your career at security service, but you're still busy at work, and so we're a lot alike in that area. I don't think I'll ever retire, right? I'll get bored. It's like I want to keep creating, I want to keep solving problems. So, listeners, if anybody's out there that wants to maybe pick Julian's brain, if you think that maybe he can help you as a leader, as an organization, be sure to reach out and follow his work on social media. Website links and social handles will be in the show description. So if you want to get a hold of Julian, just look into the description and we'll have a link there to reach out to him. Julian, in our relation to our conversation today, what's one piece of actionable advice you'd like the audience to walk away with?
The one thing that I would like for folks to take away is another kind of consideration around what it means about communication. And I don't mean communication with regard to how you are talking to your neighbor or how you're talking in an email. Those are different flavors of it. But what I mean is a more deeper sense to the word communication and what it means as far as how information flows within an organization. And that's to have people understand what information do they need? What information do they know? Who needs to know that information? How much of that information should they know? What is the best way for that information to get shared? What media should it be in? Should it be in a document? Should it be in a voicemail? Should it be in an email? Should it be in a diagram? How many times does it need to be repeated? Does it need to also go into different kinds of presentations? Are there different levels of involvement with that information about how it's shared or how it's evolved and how it's organized? What use in the future would that information have with regard to then how potentially you store that information? Does it warrant, say, for instance, someone just creating a small YouTube video on something? Does it require someone potentially to set up a meeting? Does it require just a small change? What kind of other aspects of that communication should go on? Bear in mind that no communication is a decision of communication as well. So I would like everyone to take another look at what it means about communication, the many different multidimensional facets of information that's involved. How you communicate is an important aspect of it, but what you communicate, when you communicate, and what degree of reference back to the communication is important as well. If people master, and I haven't come across anyone who's really mastered communication in that deepest sense of the word. I'd say I've got, probably maybe like 50%, good at it, because it's that difficult to do. If you truly understand what I'm saying with regard to how communication should be mastered within an organization, if you truly appreciate what it means about effective communication in its deepest sense, then you will be head and shoulders far above as an effective organization if you are operating with that level of appreciation and care about how you communicate.
Such a deep subject. And it's, it's something I've worked at for years to master, right? I mean, I haven't mastered it, right? It's definitely a work in progress, but I've gone down I've had a lot of training. I've had a lot of workshops, whether it be speaking, whether it be communicating to executive boards, whether it be communicating with the spouse, kids, like you name it. It's so challenging, but it's so important. So yes, I mean, communication is huge. And if you really take the time to look into it, like Julian's suggestion, it is a vast space, but it's extremely powerful. So thank you for that, Julian. I definitely agree with, communication being very important, and it's definitely worthy of taking action on. We are up on time, Julian, so we're going to go ahead and close out. But thank you again for sharing your knowledge and for, giving us your time, and definitely looking forward to our continued conversations.
I appreciate you having me, and again, I sincerely appreciate the opportunity to share what I know.
Yeah, likewise. Appreciate your time, Julian. Audience, don't forget to help your fellow tech humans. Share this podcast and follow me on LinkedIn at Javier Guerra 360. See you next time on the Tech Human Experience.
The Tech Human Experience